Her body hung suspended, ankles bound tight above her, the coarse rope cutting into her skin with every ragged breath she managed to pull in. Thomas Calloway stood a few feet away, fingers wrapped around her forearm, studying her with the kind of look that belongs to a man wrestling with a decision he can't undo. The barn door gaped open behind him, flooding the space with the brutal white heat of a Montana afternoon. Somewhere outside, a horse moved through the stillness, unbothered, indifferent. Her wrists were raw, her clothes twisted and filthy, blood already darkening the rope marks. She had made her move at dawn. They had caught her before she cleared the property line. She hadn't been hanging long, but the heat alone was enough to break a person. "Please," she breathed, barely above a whisper. "Please just take it off." She meant the heavy outer garment Clara had layered onto her, now trapping heat against her like a furnace. He didn't move right away. Thomas just stood there, jaw tight, something behind his eyes that looked almost like a man fighting his own nature. Clara Voss watched from the side, her expression flat and calculating. "Go ahead," she said softly. "She belongs to you now. Consider the account settled." Like a living person was just a number in a ledger. Frank Voss leaned against the barn wall, somewhere between drunk and present, aware enough to understand what was unfolding but too far gone to stop it. He kept his eyes on the ground. That silence cut deeper than anything else in the room. For a long beat, it looked like Thomas might go through with it. His grip tightened. Adelaide squeezed her eyes shut. Then everything changed in a single second. Thomas moved with a speed that didn't match his years. His fist connected with Frank's jaw, dropping him hard into the dirt. The knife was already in his other hand, blade working through the ropes in 2 quick pulls. Adelaide crashed down onto the planked floor, gasping, her whole body shaking as she tried to remember how to breathe. Clara stumbled backward, voice climbing. "You have no right to be here." Thomas didn't acknowledge her. He finished cutting the last length of rope, then stripped off his coat and draped it over Adelaide without a word. Only then did he speak. "Who's coming for her tonight?" Adelaide clutched the coat around herself, still trembling. "Denton Cole," she whispered. Thomas had heard that name. It wasn't the kind of name people repeated in the open. It moved through conversation like smoke, low and fast, and left something unpleasant behind. That name changed the shape of everything in the room. Thomas looked up, and this time his eyes carried no uncertainty, because he understood now that this wasn't a family dispute or a debt collection. This was something with reach, something organized. And the question that settled over him wasn't whether he should have come at all. The real question was how many people in this valley already knew, and had decided that knowing was enough. Thomas didn't waste another moment. He helped Adelaide push herself upright, careful and unhurried, like she was made of something fragile that had already been tested too far. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. He turned away while she gathered the coat around herself. "Take your time," he said quietly. "You're out of danger. For now." Those last 2 words carried weight. He walked her out through the back of the barn toward the old stone well at the edge of the yard. The heat hit them both immediately, the kind of thick, punishing summer heat that settles into your bones after you've been tied up in it for too long. Adelaide leaned against the well's edge and worked on breathing. Thomas cranked up the bucket, cupped some water in his palm, and passed it to her. She drank fast, choked, then drank again. Out on the road, a wagon rolled by and slowed. Someone watching the property? Thomas noticed, but kept his attention on her. He didn't stare, didn't press, didn't reach for anything she wasn't offering. That alone was disorienting to her. "You're not taking me back to them?" she asked, her voice scraped down to almost nothing. Thomas shook his head once. "That's not something I do." Adelaide studied his face for a moment, then dropped her gaze to the dry ground by her feet. "I've tried leaving twice," she said. "Didn't get far." She paused. "Clara says I owe her. Says I cost more than I'm worth unless I work it off." Thomas exhaled slowly. "Clara the one running things in that house?" Adelaide nodded barely. "My mother passed years ago. Clara came in after." That told him the shape of it. He had watched houses like that before. They didn't collapse all at once. They eroded season by season through small cruelties and quiet manipulation. "She's been bringing Cole around?" he asked. "He doesn't say much when my father's sober," Adelaide said. "Just watches. Like he's already made up his mind about something." Thomas's expression hardened. That matched the pattern he'd been hearing about through the past few months. Small amounts of money borrowed and never quite repaid. Strange arrangements that nobody looked at too hard. Young women folded into situations they didn't choose. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper Frank had signed the previous winter. The so-called debt. Small figures built on distorted facts. He held it out to Adelaide. "This the paper they showed you?" She looked at it. "Yes," she whispered. Thomas held it between both hands and tore it cleanly in two. The sound was soft, but it changed the entire weight of the moment, because now this wasn't a financial matter. It was something else entirely. And as voices began rising around the front of the house, one thing became undeniable. If Thomas left without her, she wouldn't just find herself back in that barn by nightfall. She might not survive the night at all. So the question was never really whether he would take her with him. The real question was who was already moving to make certain she never got the chance to leave. Thomas was already heading toward his horse. "Get up," he said. "We're not staying." Adelaide didn't hesitate. She gripped the coat tighter and made her legs work. Behind them, the voices at the front of the house grew louder. Men, at least two, maybe more. Clara had moved fast. Thomas helped Adelaide into the saddle and swung up behind her in one fluid motion. They went out through the back, following the dry creek bed until wagon tracks dissolved into open dust. No one shouted after them. That was the troubling part. Men like Denton Cole didn't chase you loudly. They positioned themselves ahead of you and waited. The ride stretched close to an hour before the landscape began to breathe again, the grass filling in, the air carrying a hint of coolness from the tree line. A modest summer camp emerged through the cottonwoods, a fire ring, a low-slung cabin, and a woman standing at an outdoor table with her arms folded. The look on her face was the kind that comes from having seen plenty of hard situations and not being impressed by any of them. "That you, Calloway?" she called out. Thomas stepped down from the horse. "Need a place for the girl, May." May Donovan looked Adelaide over, thorough and honest, but not unkind. "She looks like she's had a rough stretch of it," she said. "Bring her inside." Inside the cabin, things were modest and orderly and safe. That last part was what mattered. May handed Adelaide water and a clean cloth without asking her to explain herself. Thomas stayed close to the door. Always close to the door. He didn't sit down. Didn't relax his posture. Kept one hand within easy reach of his belt. After a while, Adelaide spoke again, quieter than before. "You always this silent?" Thomas gave a small shrug. "Talking doesn't do much of the heavy lifting." May let out a short sound from the stove. "He used to be more conversational," she said, "back in his days wearing a star." Adelaide looked at him with something new in her expression. Thomas neither confirmed nor denied it. He stepped outside into the last of the daylight. Virginia City wasn't far off. Denton Cole would already be repositioning. Thomas saddled up and before he left, turned back to the doorway. "Don't open that door for anyone you don't recognize." Adelaide gave a firm nod. She believed him this time. In town, the atmosphere felt deceptively ordinary, too calm for the hour. Thomas walked his horse past the saloon and around to the back stables, the kind of place where men said things they didn't want remembered. Two of Cole's men were there, leaning against the fence rail, voices low and easy. "Tonight," one of them was saying. "He wants it handled before people start pulling at threads." Thomas stepped in before they registered his presence. The first man went down with one strike. The second reached for something at his hip and didn't get there. Thomas pressed him hard into the stable wall until the resistance left him. No wasted motion. No unnecessary noise. Just enough force and then stillness. He checked their coats and found a small cloth-bound notebook. Names, amounts, not just Adelaide. 3 others. Different properties, same structure, same signature, moving through all of it. Thomas closed the notebook slowly. The heaviness in his chest expanded. This wasn't one broken household. This was architecture. He stepped back into the street. The town continued moving around him like nothing had shifted. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they had chosen not to. Now, before we move forward, take a moment. Get comfortable. Tell me in the comments what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. And if stories like this one mean something to you, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because what Thomas found written in that notebook was only the beginning of what was buried in this valley. Thomas didn't ride back immediately. He stood at the edge of town long enough to let the weight of the notebook settle. Young women listed like inventory. Small debts weaponized into leverage. He had crossed paths with men like Cole before. They didn't scare off easily. They only stopped when the cost became undeniable. By the time he returned to May's property, the sky had shifted into that deep, bruised blue that comes just before full dark. But something wasn't right. No fire, no sound from inside. His hand dropped toward his gun without a conscious decision. He stepped down carefully, boots finding the ground without a sound. The cabin door stood open an inch. Not wide, just enough to be wrong. Inside, a chair had been knocked onto its side. May was standing near the table, rigid, her eyes fixed on the far corner. And there was Adelaide, back flat against the wall, both hands wrapped around a pitchfork like she had every intention of using it. On the floor, one of Cole's men lay groaning, his lips split open, wrists bound behind him. Thomas walked in without rushing, without raising his voice. "Tell me what happened." Adelaide steadied her breathing. "He came asking questions," she said. "Told me you had taken something that didn't belong to you." May cut in without softening it. Boy underestimated her, and he certainly underestimated my skillet. There was something new in Adelaide's eyes now, not just fear, something that had grown a spine. Thomas gave a single nod. "Good." He crouched beside the man on the floor, checked him over, breathing. That would do. The man turned his head and spat. "Cole's not sitting on this anymore." Thomas grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled his face close. Then he shouldn't have started it. He let him back down. No heat in his voice. No fury, just resolution. That was the part that unsettled people most. May stepped closer. "Are you planning to run from this, or are you planning to finish it?" Thomas stood quietly for a beat. Then he looked at Adelaide. Really looked. She didn't drop her gaze. Didn't pull back. Didn't plead. That made the path clear. "Not running," he said. He crossed to the corner of the room, opened an old wooden chest, and lifted out a worn revolver. "Check the cylinder. Loaded. Ready." Adelaide watched him. "Are you certain about this?" Thomas paused for just a moment. "No," he said honestly. "But I should have moved sooner last time. Someone paid for my hesitation." Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying sound from the direction of town. More voices than the hour warranted. May moved to the window, eyes narrowing. "That's not right for this time of night." Thomas stepped into the doorway and listened. Then he saw them. Far down the road, a line of lanterns stretched across the path from Virginia City. Not scattered. Not wandering. Moving together with purpose, headed directly toward the cabin. He didn't need to guess. Cole wasn't operating in the shadows anymore. He was making it public. Coming in the open, and he wasn't coming to negotiate. So the question that now hung over everything was this. When those lanterns reached the cabin door, would Thomas be standing in a town that had already made its choice? The lanterns kept advancing, measured, unhurried. The march of men who have convinced themselves they're on the right side of something. Thomas stepped out into the dirt, revolver held low and steady at his side. Behind him, Adelaide appeared in the doorway. She could have stayed back. She chose not to. That said more than words. Cole rode at the front, composed, as though this were a routine errand. "You're making something simple into something complicated," he called out. "Give her up, and every man here goes home to his family tonight." Thomas looked past Cole at the men arranged behind him. Farmers, laborers, men he had sat near at a counter or passed on a road. Standing there as though a human life being bartered was just local business. That was what pressed down heaviest. Not the weapons, not the numbers, the normalcy of it. How many of those men had heard something and decided it wasn't their concern? Thomas spoke when he was ready. "She's not yours to collect, short and plain." But it landed. Cole's expression thinned at the edges. "There's a legitimate debt involved," he said. "This isn't about a debt," Thomas replied. "This is about men who decided a young woman was something you could transfer between accounts." Cole glanced at the men behind him, clearly expecting one of them to move. Nobody did. Thomas shook his head slowly. "You didn't scare them," he said. "You just found people who hadn't decided yet." The air pulled tight around all of them. Nobody moved. And then Adelaide stepped forward. One step, not a dramatic gesture, just presence. Her voice was quiet but reached every person standing in that yard. She named what had been done and she named who had let it happen. One lantern dropped. Then another. Cole read it a fraction too late. His hand moved toward his weapon. Thomas was faster. One clean shot. Cole folded into the dust. Nobody in the crowd moved. Even the air seemed to hold. And then it was over. Not clean, not without cost, but over. The crowd didn't celebrate. They stood in the silence of people who knew they had let something go too long. The weight of that was its own kind of reckoning. In the days that followed, the town did what towns always do. It moved forward. But not everything settled back to the way it had been. Adelaide didn't return to that house. She didn't have to. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she chose her own next step. And it wasn't built on survival. It was built on something steadier. Thomas didn't linger in Virginia City. Men like Cole had networks, and those networks had long memories. He rode back to his land. Same fences, same wind across the open grass. But something in him had repositioned. He hadn't looked away this time, and there's a particular kind of peace that only comes from that. Here's something I want to leave you with. I've sat with a lot of stories like this one. Not all of them reach a moment of intervention. Not all of them give someone a voice in time. But the ones that do, they stay with you. They remind you that silence is never neutral, that choosing not to act is still a choice, and it belongs to you the same as any other. Maybe you've had a moment like that in your own life. Something that didn't feel right. Something you told yourself wasn't your place to address. So here's what I want you to sit with tonight. When that moment comes again, will you be the person who looks away, or will you be the person who steps forward? This story has been carefully retold with details shaped to bring its meaning to the surface. The visual